that are just kind of, well, should we just look at them?
Let's look at 27A then.
This image shows a canyon on the left-hand side, and you see a kind of ribbing effect.
It looks like a glass tube, doesn't it?
Yeah, these have been called the glass tubes on Mars by researchers. NASA's position is that this is actually the ripples, the white ripples is actually sand being blown into a ripple pattern. And NASA, there are examples where you have like a valley where you get this rippling effect. But this is basically used by some people to, they call them glass tubes because in our popular culture, I think there's been science fiction books or films describing how the ancient Martian civilization has tried to transport water, for example. In fact, this was Percival in the 19th century. Percival Lovely, American astronomer who pushed the canals idea. The idea of canals on Mars. Yeah, well, the guy who discovered them was actually called Giovanni Schiaparelli. He discovered something called canal, what he described as canali. Canali was mistranslated into canal. It actually means channel. And so when canal caught on, and
that's very similar to canal.
You can understand why they mistranslated it, but it actually means something different. Canal means something artificial, whereas channel means it could be artificial or natural. So that was the discrepancy. So anyway, Percival Lovely, American astronomer, believed, and he wrote books about this. Basically, that the Martians were basically transporting water and stuff from the temperate regions which had water down to the desert regions, and he had this idea that they were using that kind of thing. So that grew up in our popular culture where people in science fiction were talking about glass tunnels and tube systems under the ground of Mars. So when people saw this image, they made that logical connection between the idea of these tunnels under Mars and what they'd read about in science fiction. The thing is, it actually looks remarkably similar, and that is quite fascinating.
Yeah, maybe could it be a way of protecting themselves from the atmosphere?
Well, assuming that's what's in there, then yes, it would be.
Okay, what about 28A then? Let's go to that.
The next one is another example. It's probably not as clear because the contrast is quite shallow on that, so it's actually quite difficult to see. But it's just another example where you have, on the left you have this effect, and on the right you have this effect. NASA maintains that you're getting this ribbing effect, and what these are is simply just sand dunes forming. And so I guess if you're looking at this particular image, what you'd see is like maybe a geological fault or something, where you have like a canyon of sorts, only partially revealed, where you have sand blowing down. But equally, if we just hypothetically, if we knew that there were intelligent intelligent beings at some point in Mars in the past, then we'd have to look at these with a more critical eye, and then maybe address this with the perspective that these possibly would be artificial, even though they do maybe look like sand dunes.
Okay.
But if we go on to the next image.
Next image is 29A.
A little bit more fascinating. This image shows two pieces of main features. At the top you have a crater, an impact crater.
Well, we've got a close-up of that in a minute, but we won't go there yet.
Actually, yeah, we'll go to that one now because we'll see it in more detail and we'll come back to it.
So
if we go to the next image, what we see is the crater with what seems like a geodesic dome, effectively half a golf ball-shaped object sat in a crater. Now this is kind of interesting for a number of reasons.
Well, one, it's highly unlikely, isn't it?
That's one. Secondly, the fact that for geological processes to create something, you have to have like some geological activity for one. So what happens? Geology creates landforms, and the only thing that can happen after that is basically caused by things falling from the sky. For example, like a meteorite impact, which we actually have in this case. We've got a crater, but the only thing that can happen to put things of that size, I suppose, into a crater like that is either more geological process. Maybe things fell out of the sky.
Well, could that not be the rock that caused the crater?
Well, if just for something to cause a crater, it would have been well, something that size would actually cause a much bigger crater for one. But secondly, the boulders that create the craters are normally, if they get left on the surface, they're usually small boulders anyway, and then normally they go they can just end up inside underneath the crater as well. So it's definitely not that size of object would have made a massive crater, not that size crater.
All right, well, let's go back.
So first, fundamentally, that is really, really good evidence of artificiality on Mars. The fact that you've got an object which appears sitting on top of something which has got no chance to do anything geologically, and which has got an impact crater which has happened at one point in history, and then on top of that, some other rock form, I'm assuming rock form, some other material has been put on top in the shape of a geodesic half sphere.
Okay, basically. So let's go back to 29A if we can.
So now we see it in context with another example of the glass tunnels that we spoke about before.
And oh look, there's one branching off.
Yeah, there seems to be an intersection.
Heading in this direction.
By themselves, the glass tunnels are not particularly revealing. Actually, personally, I think that particular example of a glass tunnel is actually more fascinating than anything else, even from any perspective. But the fact that you've actually got this object, which looks like it could be artificial, well, I can't think of any other artificial process. The natural process that could create that. It would be the first thing you'd look for if you went to look for artificiality in Mars, right next to these tunnels, which kind of makes you have to reevaluate what you thought about the original glass tunnels. They might have looked like sand dunes and going down canyons, but we have to really readdress looking at what we've just learned about the artificial nature of these things. We have to really readdress what we've just learned in the past.
Absolutely. Well, I've got a text from Sean in Northampton who says, I bet you don't read this one out. He says, I can't see any faces or trees. Has this guy had too much LSD? So, well, Sean, what do you think now? You've seen the tunnels and the geodesic dome in the crater. Perhaps you could text in again. So, Simon in Morecambe says, Anthony, your evidence is spot on, as I have found the obvious is met with a wall of silence.
Yeah, well, that's the point. You see, all of this research and what people are trying to do is NASA's not actually accountable to us. It's an American agency, but it's accountable to the American people.
Well, it's a military agency as well.
It's a military. People don't really realise that. But from the Americans' perspective, they're paying their taxes. They're paying for it, and so they believe they're in their rights to actually find this information. Even if they don't have more information than they're actually letting on, they would at least. If they would at least look and investigate some of these anomalies more further, and it's something that they simply haven't done. All they've managed to do is ridicule them. We saw with the photograph of over-processing of the face on Mars. We've seen it where if you take the example of the evidence for life on Mars from the Viking mission, where it tested positive, the liberal release experiment tested positive, then it gets written off just because it was the only one that tested positive. Yet they find out one of the other three experiments that tested negative was fundamentally flawed, and we couldn't possibly have found what they were looking for. It wasn't sensitive enough. So, I mean, the fact that we've got all this evidence that there's potential current life on Mars, from the Vikings' position in bacterial form, that kind of level. We've got evidence that it's in a kind of higher form, in like plant life, higher flora and things, like from the examples of what we showed of trees. And again, we need to go back and study this more to really assess what that really is. It could well be geology, we don't know. We need to go back and look. NASA don't seem to be too keen to do that.
We've got evidence of things that look like fossils.
Evidence, yeah, that's an interesting one because NASA purposefully landed the two rovers on the former ocean beds. It's you kind of suspect that maybe that's what they were looking for, considering they were actually looking for past life and but they've not paid any attention.
We've got evidence of small artifacts, like we showed from that Richard Hoagland image, and there are plenty more of those if you go to the Enterprise mission. It's just enterprisemission.com, isn't it, I think?
That's right, yeah.
That was it. You find it easily. Just do Hoagland, Hoagland as a search, and you'll find it. And of course, you've got evidence of these other weird things like faces and pyramids and so on.
The first one...
There's another. I've got to read this text actually quickly. This is from Derek Woodman, and he says, "Surely there are two other faces: the Cerberus face, also the one at Elysium." And we haven't got the pictures of those, but there aren't there, two other faces?
Yeah, I brought them with me, but we haven't put them on the slideshow.
One is a profile face of what looks like a beautiful woman, isn't it?
Yeah, it actually looks like a Negro race woman. Actually, just. Basically on the side as a side profile. There's also these are all in the same region. I think it's actually.
And they're on your website, aren't they?
They're actually on my website. Yeah, if you go to AnthonyBeckett.com.
Anthony Beckett, BECKETT.com, so you can see them on there.
Yeah, just look up artifacts on Mars on there. But what the slide shows is this kind of human-looking woman as a side profile. But there's another image which looks like. Basically someone in an Egyptian headdress. And by the faces, what these seem to be is not like a face on Mars, which is like a hill, which is like a three-dimensional structure. These look more like the Nazca Plains in Peru type of scenario, where you have a flat surface which
they've scraped out a hummingbird.
It's the material on the flat surface, or a reasonable flat surface, which is causing this illusion, which is illusion. It's an illusion that forms these images. It's definitely not a human being down there. It's an impression. We're claiming.
Well, it's like those giant CERN Abbas guy or something.
The question really comes down to
in the chalk, isn't it?
Yeah, the question really comes down to: were these just formed by natural processes, or is this kind of art?
Well, it would be a massive coincidence, wouldn't it, if these giant faces, if there are three of them that we've found,
In the same area where you have the faces, actually, I don't have these on the website, but you might find them elsewhere. There's actually evidence of, well, there's actually pictures of where people found images of like parrots and dolphins.
Yes, I've seen those
I think
ones,
lions
yes.
as well.
Yeah.
And all around the same region. I haven't got these on my own website.